So here we go. This is sort of meant mostly for vendors and people who are going to use this list in a program or selling sound effects and things like that. We'll do a wider user unveiling probably next Saturday, and I'll open up to anybody who wants to come and join, and I expect to be a couple hundred people. So this is a bit rough. I'm going to sort of jump around and show a few things. It's not super polished yet, but it'll give you a sense of what we've been doing, what our hopes are, and things like that. So this is us. We are calling this sort of public release of this system, we're calling it a system, version 8. So up until now, we've been working on various lists. I started at version 1 many years ago. Version 7 was the one that we did all the work to. Version 8 is a completely clean sort of version. We're calling it that. And we're doing that because people took version 6 and version 7 and they started using it long before we meant for them to and different things. So we want to make this sort of clear, like this is now the list sort of in its locked off form. And so we're calling it version 8, even though it's the first release sort of wide. That's what we're calling it, to make clear. So today I just want to go through a few things. I'm going to show you some of the resources for like finding out more information, sort of some of the links that we have and stuff. I'm going to talk about the project a little bit, pretty briefly. We're going to look at the list sort of at its heart. This is basically a list of categories and subcategories. We're going to talk about a file name structure. This is sort of an optional extension of what we've been working on. We're sort of going to propose this sort of file name structure that people can adopt, but it's not sort of a requirement of this system, but it's quite useful. Then I'm going to just show some examples. I'm going to show a couple things in SoundMiner because that's where it's sort of working now, a couple things in Pro Tools, a little standalone app, and then talk at the end sort of if you want to say you've adopted this sort of system, what are the vendor requirements? They're very, very simple, actually. So we're not trying to make this difficult. In fact, we're trying to make this quite simple. The first thing is just to start, you just want to go to the webpage, universalcategorysystem.com. Prashant in India has built us a web page. It's not super elaborate, but it has links to everywhere that's sort of important. So it has a little about sort of section that you can sort of see here. In the next section down, it has resources, and this is sort of an icon of what the list looks like. If you click it, it'll take you to the Google Drive folder where all the resources are available. The list itself, the tools that we're working on, documentation, videos, all these kind of things will be available in that shared Google Drive. Everybody has read access. You'll be able to download anything you want from there. You won't be able to edit things with a few exceptions, but this is where, and we'll look at this in a few minutes. And then at the bottom of it is basically a set of links. We have a Slack channel. I don't know if everybody uses Slack, but if not, Slack looks basically like this. We have a UCS channel, and it's a forum-based app for discussion and things like that. It's quite clever. So we have, for example, discussion about SoundMiner, Soundly, Basshead, Keyboard Maestro, SoundFlow, different programs, DAWs like Reaper, Nuendo, Pro Tools. We'll make a Sound Particles one in here. Things where you can find the artwork and different things like that, how they've been implemented in different things. So this is just the best home for our sort of system. So we encourage everybody who's interested in learning more to join this Slack channel, and you can join any of these channels that you want. And if you don't know about Slack, there's a lot of resources out there for getting used to Slack. We have a YouTube channel. There's nothing up there right now, but I'll be starting to post some videos there. Things like what we're doing today, but more polished, hopefully. There's a mailing list which you can sign up for. And there's a Facebook page, and I'll just show you real quick that this is what the mailing list page looks like. If you go there, you can hit subscribe. You can subscribe to the mailing list. We'll be sending out announcements and things there. There's 400 or 500 people signed up for this, I think, 400 right now. This again is our sort of Facebook group page. It's been a little inactive lately because most of us have moved over to Slack, but it is still available if anybody wants to post questions there. And then again, we have this YouTube channel that, again, nothing there yet, but eventually we will have sort of stuff there. So, okay. So, again, just go to the homepage, universalcategorysystem.com. There's all the links that you'll sort of need basically for what we're talking about today. So what is this thing that we've sort of come up with? Well, we're calling it the Universal Category System. I originally called it this Universal Category List, and it came about because many years ago, when I was doing a class in Hamburg, Germany, a bunch of the students, when I sort of said, what is it that I could maybe help you with? What is it that I could teach you? Almost all of them said, we don't know how to organize a library. Like, we have no idea how to deal with organizing a library. How do you categorize sound effects? How do you organize sound effects? So about 4 years ago, I made this version of a universal category list. We made it available through the SoundMiner website. It was sort of incorporated into SoundMiner in not super heavy ways, but it was in there. And that was sort of the end of it. And I didn't sort of look at it again for many years. But now that I had some time this year, I thought maybe I want to revisit this idea and sort of look over this and have some new ideas of making it a much better list, more usable list. So that's what we've been doing. So we went back to this idea of developing this. So at its core, this universal category system is basically a list of defined category and subcategory pairs. So ambience, public place; ambience, restaurant and bar; animal, dog; animals, farm; boats, submarine; boats, ships; things like that. It's also basically an abbreviated form for each pair that we're calling the CAT ID, or category ID is what that's short for. And the CAT ID is sort of at the heart of this whole system. It's what makes it all sort of work. It's what makes it all universal. And again, I'll show you that when we look at the list. And also, we have been working on a list of synonyms for each category pair, and I'll show you the benefit of that in a minute. But so this is sort of a quick little section of what it looks like. So we have basically 82 top level categories and a total of about 650 sort of subcategories. And for each of them is assigned basically a category ID. So air miscellaneous, air blow, burst, hiss, and suction; aircraft miscellaneous, helicopter, jet. So for every category, there's a miscellaneous to catch things that just don't fit in one of the other places. Like, we don't expect that we've defined every single possible sound on earth. Our goal wasn't to make a list that was 14,000 items long. The goal was to make a category list that was usable, not overwhelmingly large, but large enough to contain basically everything that you hopefully can think of. And then these synonyms are basically other words, and this list will keep growing, but things that somebody might search for that we want to point them back to this category. So for prop airplane, biplane, triplane, turboprop, stunt plane, crop duster, Piper Cub, common sort of words that somebody might look and be expected to sort of find things in this. And again, I'll show you sort of how we're using this at the moment, but this is available for other people to sort of use and script and incorporate into their programs potentially in interesting ways that maybe we haven't thought of. So also for each basically category subcategory pair, we're translating this list into different languages, and that work is ongoing. Certain languages are done, certain aren't, but behind the scenes it looks something like this. So for every basically category subcategory pair, there's a foreign translation of that. So right now, and the holes are here because these are new additions to the finalized list that we're having filled in by the various translators. So certain ones are done, certain ones aren't, but we have Polish, German, Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese, Chinese, Dutch, Spanish, Japanese, Italian. We also have Finnish, Norwegian and Swedish are being worked on. So there's quite a few of these things, and I'll show you again how one way that can be utilized sort of in a minute. And then lastly, again, it's sort of an optional thing, but something we feel pretty strongly about is this idea of trying to develop also a universal file name sort of to go with this category system. And I'm going to talk a bit about that as well. And again, that's an optional component of this. It's sort of not required, but we think there's some big advantages to that, and we want to sort of propose this idea. So let me just show you real quick. If you were to go to the Google homepage or the Google Drive home for us, this is what you basically see. And at the very top level is the list itself. And if you double click it, it's in a Google Sheet at the moment. You could download it in an Excel format or whatever you wanted. And again, you'll see that basically there are categories and subcategories and defined category IDs for all of these sort of pairs. There's also an explanations column, which sort of gives an overview of what's meant to go in this. So probably zoom in a little bit here, it'll be easier to see. And this column isn't used anywhere. It's just literally for somebody who's trying to understand the list or look for things. This column right now is purely informational. But we have, and again, I won't go into everything now, but we've alarms, ambiances, animals. We have a set of things called archived, which are for things like test tones, impulse responses, reference material, trademarked things, places you want to store things, like a mix. Beeps, bells, birds, boats, bullets, cartoons, ceramics. So there's a lot, but it's not overwhelming. Again, there's 82 sort of top level categories. And again, there's an explanation for all of them. So this is at the core of it, what this sort of system is really this list of information. So if nothing else, this sort of definition of these categories and to these category IDs is basically what the whole point of this system is, to try and standardize a list of category subcategories for people around the world to use. The problem, as I saw that was happening, is I would go and I would buy libraries, and those libraries would come in, and half of them would come in as plain prop, Some would come in as aircraft prop, some would come in as prop plane, some would come in as nothing with no metadata at all. And so the whole idea of this is by defining this category ID, basically any user around the world that buys a sound effect that adheres to this system knows exactly what category and subcategory that's going to go in. And by defining this category ID, basically any program could take and fairly easily script or automatically fill in these pieces of metadata based just on this little thing using a lookup. And I'll show you that in SoundMiner how it works. And so that's basically the list. I have also put at the top of the list a top sheet, which is just an explanation of the 82 sort of top level categories. So this one is just the sort of explaining what we mean by ICE and what we mean by human and machines and these kind of things. So this is just, again, informational only. It's just designed to help somebody who's interested in learning about what we're doing sort of look over that. So these two things are sitting right at the top level. There's a set of other folders here. In the documentations folder is basically where things will be put. For example, the only thing up there right now, and I'll just show you, is basically a PDF that I've written explaining the file name convention, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. But there'll be documentation like this to help explain things with lots of examples. And this will really walk you through very completely our sort of file name structure, why we've done the way we did, what we hope to achieve with it. So that's in there. We have also an Excel version of the list pre-built in case somebody just wants to download. You can download it right from Google Sheets as an Excel, but here it is as well if somebody just wants to download these in Excel to have their own sort of copy. There's a set of folders basically that are pre-built for a user if they didn't have any kind of a program and they just wanted a set of folders that match this system. So if you look under category full, you could come in here and go within every category and there's a set of folders, and you could simply download the zip file for those if you, and this is again just empty sets of folders. And there's one basically based on category only, which is just the category names, those 82 top level categories, or there's the one with that category and subcategory folders built in as well. There's the logo in various sort of styles and sizes and things like that here as well for people who want to use the artwork. There's a utilities folder, which basically has going to have, and we'll show off some of this in a bit, but you can go in here by, say, Mac, Pro Tools, and here's a Keyboard Maestro thing that I'll show you, which is sort of meant to name file names in accordance with this that works in Pro Tools. So we have quite a few things being developed. Kai's dad wrote a really clever program, a standalone program, which is being ported to the PC. It exists in Mac right now, and I'm going to show you that as well. So this is where you'd come basically for all of the implementation things that we're working on, and other people will work on, not just us. We're going to organize them by sort of program or things like that. And there's already several, quite a few more being worked on, and so things like that will appear here. So maybe a SoundFlow workflow will appear in here, Keyboard Maestro things, standalone programs, sort of other things like that. And there's a vendors folder, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but we're going to basically keep up this idea of keeping a vendor list that lists vendors, sort of lets them choose an associated abbreviation to use in the file names, which we'll talk about a little bit. Gives us a contact information if they want to put it here, link to their website. And then as libraries sort of are put into this system, basically a vendor will be able to come and supply us with that information, you know, give us the name of the library. We're not exactly sorted on this. We're going to probably ask them to assign sort of some kind of a library ID for internal use. And there's different technologies we're thinking about how this might be useful. I'll talk about it a little at the end maybe, and a link directly to the library if they want. So again, this is just something that will be available to anybody if they want to see libraries that are available that sort of match this system that have been assigned to these categories. You know, this is something we'll have available. And the way it will work is that basically a vendor would come in here and just fill out this sort of form. They basically just duplicate this sheet down here and then just come in here and start filling in the information that they want. If they want to start listing their libraries, they can. If nothing else, they could choose an abbreviation. This is the sort of important one that we want to sort of, companies that have a really long name, we want to sort of encourage them to sort of pick an abbreviated version that they want to use and sort of standardize it. And again, we're doing that so that later when we do all this clever scripting and things like that, you know, the recordist, T-Rec, or whatever you want to, Frank, if you name something at some point later, we basically in SoundMiner or any other program could basically find that in the file name and expand it to the full name of your company in a metadata field or something like that. So it's just a way to sort of keep the file name length under control. And when we look at file names, this will make more sense. But again, we wanted to basically allow vendors to have a place also to sort of list their libraries and have direct links to them and just kind of have some information. So this is a little bit of a work in progress. I don't know exactly how this will work, but this is our goal with that. And then yeah, and then just ignore this brain trust folder. This is just a place for me to store the next version of the list or things I'm working on that's not available to most people if they won't even see that folder. So this is the Google Drive. This is sort of the heart where all the files will sort of live for this sort of thing. And everybody, again, the link to it is right from the homepage, universalcategorysystem.com, so you can just easily get here and start poking around. You'll have read access to everything by default. We'll give write access to everybody to this sort of submission form at some point when we're ready to sort of put that into play. And so that's it, basically, at its core is this thing. So another question is like, what can you do with it? So I want to just show you a really quick example before we look at the sort of file names and stuff. But I'm going to jump to SoundMiner. I apologize. This is just the program that sort of everything is working in. It's a program that I use. So no offense to Christian and everybody else, we'd love to have. Again, this is not a proprietary SoundMiner thing, but this is where Justin was very instrumental. He was very excited about this with the translations and things were really his idea. But this is a list of basically file names that match our file name system. And these are just a bunch of files that I made for a Zoom class that I was doing on mastering sound effects. But I want to just show you, I've just lit up a bunch of columns here, the cat ID column. Again, so the terms that we're using in these file names are actually defined fields of metadata that we're proposing. So, and we'll look at all these in a minute, but these are the most commonly used things that I would use. So one of the cool things that you'll be able to do, even from within SoundMiner, is I could simply right click and say, assign the category ID for these files. And here's my list, basically, which is now built in. And I could say, these are all dirt impacts. And the second that I do that, basically, it's going to go through and assign them the cat ID to dirt impact. It's going to say the category is dirt and sand, the subcategory is impact, and it's going to build a category full as dirt and sand impact, right? So now these files all have category IDs assigned at the head of them. So I'm going to undo that for a second. And I'm going to just run a little script, which basically says, look at the file name, look up to the first underscore. That must be the cat ID because that's sort of our requirement. And go ahead and sort of parse out that information. And so you'll see that basically by doing that, it's now taken from the file name, the cat ID, it's put it in that field, and it's assigned the category, subcategory, and the category full for all of those sort of pieces of information. So it's done that purely by the presence of this cat ID at the beginning of the file name and the fact that the program knows that that cat ID is associated with these categories and subcategories. So it's doing it via sort of a lookup table, right, and a little bit of scripting within the program. Actually it's running basically when I hit this button on my keyboard, I'm running a Lewis script basically, which just looks for this information. So again, taking the list in CSV format, any program could make use of it how they wanted. So Christian, if you're interested in this, you could basically do something similar or, whatever, but we're basically defining category and subcategory as what we're calling these two fields. There's also basically a push, I don't know, Christian, if you know, but like to start using these IXML user fields to store metadata, which will basically allow sort of universal metadata for the first time. So Reaper is working on this. SoundMiner right now is currently writing all of this metadata into IXML fields, which are then completely accessible to anybody else. So all of these fields that you see up here are basically metadata fields that are accessible to any other program. So in theory, you could take a file that's embedded with SoundMiner metadata, pull that information right into Soundly or vice versa. If you wrote into these same fields in IXML, basically, then anybody else could, So we have this hopefully option of universal metadata as well, if we can all sort of agree on names and things. So you see that it didn't fill in a bunch of these other fields, but it did fill in this because the script that I'm running is purely looking for this category thing. But we have another script here, which basically will expand the full file name. And again, we'll look at the file names in a second, but by running that, basically, it also has looked up my initials. It's basically built an effects name out of the middle piece of the file name and different things. I must have an error in my name here somehow. I don't know why that one didn't assign. I got an extra underscore. Again, I'll look at the file names in a second, but I just want to show you sort of this idea of a structured file name can basically, you can do a lot of things via scripting with it. And let me show you just real quick also this cat ID script again, basically with one button. In addition to filling in category and subcategory, it's building category fulls and categories and subcategories for all these languages as well. These are simply holes because they haven't been translated into that language yet, the last version of the list. But you'll see basically, if you take any of these things, animal, insect, here it is in Spanish, German, French, Finnish, Danish, Polish, Chinese, Japanese. So you kind of get this idea that users in various countries sort of have access now to sort of categories and subcategories in the native language. The other kind of cool thing is that in theory, a user could come here, I'm going to undo. A user could take all these sound files and, click basically category full assign directly in their native language, and it will basically translate backwards into English and to all the other languages as well. So by doing that, basically I've assigned that. Apparently the one I clicked is basically sailboats. So you can see that it can do this. And again, this is sort of something that right now is built into SoundMiner, but this information is in the list, will be available to anybody who wants to try to utilize it in interesting ways. So that's just an example sort of what the Cat ID can do for you within a program, like a database program or whatever, again, and what you can do with some of the translations and things like that. And so this stuff is available really in theory to anybody who wanted to use this, but it's pretty integrally built right now into SoundMiner. There's a lot of things, and there's a bunch more, but I won't go too much into depth of that now, but you get it. Just I wanted to show sort of an example of what you can do with it. Is there any questions up until that point? Otherwise, I'm going to look at the file name structure a little bit, because it's something that's a little more complicated, but I do think it's an important sort of part. And then I want to show you a couple examples again of a couple of the tools that we've built in particular, sort of what we're doing with them. But if anybody has a comment or a question so far, just pop your hand up in the participants tab, and I'll unmute you and we can chat. Otherwise, I'll keep moving on forward. All right, thumbs up. Okay, so file name structure. So this is a sort of pet peeve of mine, but as anybody who's had to organize a library sort of knows, when you buy sound effects or when you get sound effects from various vendors, every vendor has sort of come up with their own file name structure. And some of them are better than others. Some of them have all the information that you want, and some of them are, to be honest, lacking. Some of them come in with very little information, things like that. So again, the core of this system is purely this category ID, category subcategory system, this list. This secondary part of it, this file name structure, is something we really want to encourage, but it's not sort of a required part of this system. If you want to say you're a vendor and you're adhering to this sort of USC, that's where I went to school, UCS, I'm going to mix those constantly for the rest of my life. UCS system, basically all you need to do is basically choose a sound and assign it to one of these categories and put the cat ID at the beginning of your file name. That's literally all you have to do. And I'll talk about the sort of requirements at the end. But again, to me, a file name should contain a certain amount of information. It should basically offer you a certain number of parts. And to me, basically, I think there's sort of 4 parts to a file name that sort of have to be there, in my opinion. The first part is, I think, what category, subcategory does this sound belong to? I think that's a crucial piece of information to put in the file name itself. The worst thing is to get a sort of library that comes in and it says like small something something dog, then large dog barks, then medium dog something, and you try to sort those files and they don't sort by the type of file that they are. They're not categorized or anything like that. Or it might come in large Doberman something, and then, small poodle. And it's like, okay, well, those are great pieces of information to have, but they don't solve this problem of, I want to group those files together via the file names. And so our solution, again, is this idea of the cat ID, animal dog underscore, right at the beginning of the file name. We'll put all of those things together in a list in Pro Tools, in Reaper, anywhere that you're sorting on a Finder level, sort of it sorts them all together. The second piece of information I think belongs in a file name is, what is the sound effect? So there's where you would put golden retriever close-up barks or something like that, right? Some kind of a name of the sound effect so that a user looking purely at the file name would know what that file is without even listening to it. Then I think it's important that the file name track who created the sound effect. So in this case, it could be a designer, a user, a vendor, things like that. And then for what project or library was it created? So you want to have the name of your library in the file name itself, or the name of the show, things like that. So our basic sort of file name structure has 4 parts. It uses the cat ID that we've talked about at the beginning of the file name. The next block, we're calling these blocks of information, is the effects name. Again, golden retriever close-up barks, whatever you want to call it. The creator ID we're calling basically who created this sound file, who's the person who recorded it, or what's the name of the vendor who's selling it. And the source ID, where did this sort of sound file come from? Was it made for a show? Is it made for a sound effects library? Things like that. So in our system, basically, these blocks are separated by an underscore. And the underscore is quite crucial. It's important that they be used and nothing else be used in its place, because, again, programs will basically take this file name, expect to be able to break it apart based on these underscores. So it's kind of, that's the only part of this is sort of rigid, is that underscores basically are only used to separate these 4 blocks. So real quick, the cat ID basically should answer the question, what category is applied to. The category ID represents category, subcategory, pair, and its abbreviated form from this list that we've come up with. It's defined by the list, and it can't be modified. So in order for this sort of system to work, you can't say you want animal dog to be animal canine instead and just go ahead and change the name. That defeats the entire purpose. So you can, however, change the category, subcategory names in theory if you want, which I talk about at some point later. But the cat ID is the only sort of rigid part of this. You have to agree that basically you have to pick some category that exists within our list, and you have to sort of stick with it. And the category ID has to be placed at the beginning of the file name. And again, this is because all the programs and all of the helper tools we're writing and all of the sort of implementations we want other programs to be able to do are going to have to look for this piece of information there. And if it's there for everybody's file name, then it makes it really useful for us to do stuff with it. Then the next chunk is the effects name. It answers, what is this sound? It's like, you can also think of it as a title of the sound effect. It should be sort of like a brief description of what the sound effect is, 25 to 30 characters, something like that. It isn't meant to replace a longer description that's written into the metadata that most users will probably do, and vendors anyway, like the B-wave description. It's not meant to replace that, but it's sort of a shortened version of that. And it should, again, easily tell the user what the sound is. The creator ID, simply, again, who made this sound. It could be the designer, the recordist, the vendor, etc. And we're encouraging this use of abbreviations, again, to sort of keep the file names manageably short. We don't want like 280 character file names. That's pretty difficult and unwieldy. So our advice is to sort of pick an abbreviation if your company is long. Boom luckily has a short name. They probably don't have to deal with finding an abbreviation, but other vendors and names want. In the name of, like for me as a designer, I put my initials TN, basically underscore TN, and I have sort of some tools that basically automatically look that up when I parse out that information, and it finds TN and then fills in Tim Nielsen in the designer field basically for me. And then the source ID, again, is sort of, answers the question, why was this sound made? Well, who made it for what? So it could be a project, the name of a movie like that I'm working on, again, a library. And again, we use abbreviations. So I put like TLP for The Little Prince, or Dory for Finding Dory, projects that I worked solo for the Star Wars movie, things like that. So something that, but pretty easily to me, when I look at that file name, I know where that file came from. So again, a basic file name would be something like this: the category ID ambience public, which is the category ID for ambience public place. So we start the file name with that, and we put an underscore. That breaks that piece into basically the category ID. We add an effects name: Getty Museum Busy Afternoon Crowd, right, or Afternoon Busy Crowd. So there's the title of my sound effect, telling everybody sort of what it is. I put my initials, right? That's the creator ID. And here's the source ID. I put Dory. Again, it could be anything I want, but in this case, maybe I'm telling myself I recorded that or made that when I was working on that movie. This is basically the simple form of our basic file name. So it requires these 4 parts. They have to be separated by underscores. You can't use underscores in other places because it will throw off all of these sort of scripts. And it's simple form. Here's a couple other examples. Animal, cat, loud, kitten, purr, close up. Kai, Paquin, none, right? None for not represented to a particular show. Gun, automatic, so machine gun, 9mm Uzi submachine gun, rapid fire burst, Wild Echo, which is sort of my moniker. So that would be a vendor name if I was releasing this, and maybe I had a library called machine guns, then I have an abbreviation there for what that library is. So again, these are just some examples of what a basic file name looks like. But the hope is that even in a simple file name like this, you've got kind of quite a bit of information to give to the user. So if I had no other piece of software that would break this metadata apart, if I was looking at it purely on a Finder level, I ought to be able to sort of read this file name and should make pretty simple sense to what I want to sort of see. Now, one of the things as vendors is, of course, you probably have your own file name structure, and it may not match this exactly. And again, this is not required, but it would be pretty easy if you have a file name structure that sort of works for you to sort of redo it into this. Now, there are also basically 3 optional blocks to the file name, which will be more useful to vendors, I think, and things. And I want to walk through those real quick too. So also definable within our file name is the optional user category, a vendor category, and an extra chunk called user data, which is basically a free-form chunk. So basically, the user category is an optional tail extension of the category ID block. This will make sense in a second when we look at the name. but it's defined by adding a dash directly after the cat ID and then adding a term or phrase. For example, if I put ambience public dash int, I'm now defining basically interior int as a user category. It's completely optional. Certain programs will be able to take this information. For example, SoundMiner will take that if it finds it and fill out the actual metadata field called user category. So it's sort of a way for users to define a third category of their own choosing. A lot of people are going to use it for interior or exterior, or a mic position, basically, or something like that. Tim Farrell, who does a lot of Star Trek shows, will probably define it as sci-fi spaceship and then dash enterprise or something like that, or dash, ENTR, something that he wants to basically have a sort of a third category available to him. The vendor category is very similar, but it's stored in a slightly different place. It's basically a head extension to the effects name block. It's also separated by using a dash. I'll show you again very simply in a second. But what we realized was a lot of the vendors have their own sort of category that they've already sort of built for their libraries, and it's probably in the file name somewhere already, and we wanted them to have that ability to sort of supply that information. It becomes part of the effects name block. And if nothing else, it just sits there and it doesn't hurt anything. But again, certain programs, and I'll show you, can take that again, strip it out and assign it directly to a metadata field we're calling vendor category. So Frank, in your case, some of your gun libraries, the vendor category would probably be the name of the gun itself, AK-47, 9mm Beretta, whatever, and that's basically sort of a category specific to your library. So again, but it's information you want the user to have available to them. And again, I'll show you how this gets implemented. It's pretty simple. The user data is the chunk at the very end of the file. It's after the final underscore, and it's completely freeform. It's available. None of the scripts we're doing right now sort of look at it in any way. They ignore it. So it's, you can put anything else you want at the very tail of the file name after the last underscore. So people could use it to store microphone types, a location, any other information you want to pass along to the user or store there is completely optional to you. So I just want to show you how this sort of looks in the file name. Again, the user category is defined directly after the category ID by a dash. So again, this entire chunk is still basically the category ID, but it has this optional user category assigned. So again, dash int, dash ext, for example, for an exterior recording, something I want to sort of mark that way. Again, the vendor category is defined as the first part of this effects name. So again, you would put Uzi 9mm dash short rapid fire bursts. And again, I'll show you this in a second. But again, this idea of this whole chunk stays the effects name. So to a user, they would just see Uzi 9mm dash rapid fire bursts. But by scripting, you could basically pull this piece of information out by the presence of this first dash within this chunk. And I'll show you an example of that. And the user data just goes at the end, basically. And actually, I'm going to take these parentheses out because it doesn't. That implies they have to be in parentheses. It just goes here. And again, it's after this final underscore. So currently, any of the scripts that we've been working on or tools, just ignore all of this. But it's available to put anything else that you want. So there's what the full sort of file name with all its parts would look like for us. All three of these are sort of available. We're asking that vendors not use the category ID, the user category, I should say, because we want to leave that up for purely end users to store their own things in there. That's what we defined this sort of vendor category here is instead. But this is what sort of the full possible file name would look like if every piece was filled in. So for example, this would be what a full sort of file name would look like. Ambience public place, int defines an interior perspective, underscore breaks this apart. Applebee's dash would be basically the vendor category. So let's say you had a whole library of locations and you wanted to put all the Applebee's sounds together, whatever, fine. Lunchtime Mild Crowd Walla, the creator ID Wild Echoes, restaurant and bar would maybe be the name of my fictitious library of restaurant and bar ambiences. And then again at the end, underscore Sheps XY might be where I'd store what microphone that was recorded on or what recorder or anything else that you want to put, that you could put the location of a town or something like that. So does this sort of make sense? I know this is one of the things that's, I'm trying not to be confusing. And again, it's meant to sort of give options, but again, all these red parts are optional. People don't have to use them. The scripts will basically ignore them if it doesn't find them and things like that. But what I wanted to show you, so I'll pause there for a second. But I think this file name structure represents a pretty good attempt at sort of storing all of the relevant pieces of information that a user should want within the file name itself. And again, if we all agreed that this would be a file name structure, then anybody who wants to use this sort of information would know that basically this chunk, the third chunk, is always this creator ID, and you could pull that into your program, or you could pull that into and use it any certain way that you want. So again, we're not saying this is a mandatory part of the system, but we're really encouraging this. Let me show you a couple. I'll pause for a second if anybody has any comments or questions about that. Otherwise, I'm gonna, yeah, Nicola, let me unmute you. Go ahead.
Hey, in SoundMiner, in the LUA files, will any of these be able to be defined by ourselves, like the -int?
Yes.
Could I be able to define that as interior?
Yeah. So so that's a good question. So I'll show you sort of where the things are at the moment. But yes, the idea is that if you wanted to use the user category as a list of basically abbreviations with a lookup table and break them out into a longer thing, absolutely. So yeah, that's one of the things that is not completely figured out how it's working yet. But yes, you'll be able to modify these scripts and things like that. And also in the tool I'm going to show you for like file naming, you could also develop this as a set of drop downs. So if you had common terms that you always used, interior, exterior, close, far, maybe you want to use user category as a microphones, you know, in Kai's case, maybe he wants to list his microphone there and that's what he wants to use that field for. Yeah, there'll be tools available to basically do quite a bit of stuff with that. We're keeping that as sort of a free form thing, but by default right now, it's just, I don't think in SoundMiner right now it's using the sort of lookup table part of it. Right now it's just taking whatever is in that chunk and putting it in the user category directly as it is. So it would just take, in this case, INT. But I know Justin is thinking about building it as a lookup, similar to how cat ID works. It basically matches INT, or similar to how the initials work. So in my case, in this facility lookup file, TN equals Tim Nielsen, then the scripts know when it finds TN in that chunk to break it out. There'll be something similar for that for the user category, I'm pretty sure. It's not quite ready yet, but that is our plan. And same thing for creator ID. You know, again, this abbreviation, if I put this in my lookup table, and I'll show you what that lookup table looks like, it's really simple. I just define this, then I put equals wild echoes, and I would type out the longer name. And again, any of these scripts would basically, when it encounters this, it goes, hey, is there a match for this? If there is, go ahead and put the match in place of the abbreviation. So, and we'll see that in a minute in SoundMiner. You know.
Hi,
Hey.
just two questions.
Yeah.
One of them, is it possible to have several user categories one after the other by simply adding more dashes? I don't see a problem at first, but just checking.
Yeah, not right now. In theory, right now, I don't know what would happen with the scripts if you added another dash after this. It would probably, what it's looking for is this first dash up to this underscore. So any additional dashes would just still keep that whole chunk as called the user category. We're trying to keep it, yeah, I know what you're saying, but we're trying to keep it simple and not sort of, again, we want these, I mean, you could in theory do that. You would have to be just aware that if you encouraged people to add those extra dashes, different programs would interact with it in a different way. Like right now, SoundMiner, which is the only one that's using this sort of in this way, is purely looking at that chunk from the dash to the underscore. And we're not sort of planning additional many categories. We sort of thought between our category, subcategory, and a user category, there's also like show category available in SoundMiner. And there's, you know, there's user comments, there's notes, there's lots of other fields that we sort of felt like people can use for different stuff.
Just another quick question.
Yeah.
One of the things that I'm slightly afraid is by adding that dash on the sound effects name, because that means that users will not be able to use dash on the middle of the name, which I think that it's going to have some problems because not only in several languages where dashes are quite common to write words, but also many users will probably forget about that. And then you have a problem that if you make a mistake, you are actually, imagine that someone write a dash in the middle of the name, you are going to lose the first part of the name. That is probably the most relevant one. So I was wondering if we could be interesting to have a different kind of symbol, less common, that we could still use in here, like a double dash or I don't know, some other symbol that could, I think that dash will be quite used since you are already taking the underscore, that eventually the dashes could be, from the user perspective, a little tricky.
Yeah, possibly. Here was our sort of thinking. If somebody is coming in here and they're using other dashes in here, right? Like something like that, let's say. The scripts at the moment will only look for basically the first dash and take this first term. So if a vendor wanted to, this is really meant again for vendors and not for sort of the users to sort of be putting this. So most users probably won't use this in, you know, their own file names, for example. This what I should say is this breaking out of this piece of information is completely optional. So it's not even sort of built into the breakout scripts in SoundMiner. There's a separate workflow if you wanted to sort of look at the file name and strip this out. In the case where, let's say, this didn't exist, and like you're saying, there were other dashes, the worst thing that would happen is that it would take this piece of information here and put it in the vendor category. It won't actually erase it from the effects name. This whole thing still stays the effects name. So we're not sort of breaking this out and erasing it. A user would have to specifically go into the file name and remove that themselves. So again, the worst case scenario with extra dashes is that it might take a word that you don't mean to and put it in vendor category. But again, only if you specifically went to basically say, strip the vendor category out of this file name and put it in the vendor category metadata field. Like that's a deliberate action that a user is going to have to do. It's not sort of something that happens by default. So I'm not as worried about that, but it's something to consider. I mean, I'll think about that. I mean, you know, if we did something like a double dash or something else, that's a possibility. I'll definitely think about that. For me, I'm a little less concerned again because this is an optional definition by a vendor, and the file names would come in with a very specific sort of structure that would have this on there. And again, the extra dashes won't matter. They won't hurt anything. So if a vendor wants to use lots of dashes throughout their file name, it won't sort of destroy this sort of functionality. But that's a good point. I definitely will think about that and think about if maybe there's a better way to do it by, you know, maybe it is 2 dashes, because then it's, you know, unlikely that they'll hopefully be using double dashes or something. So yeah, okay. I will definitely think about that. Maybe that's a good point. Okay. Anyone else? Otherwise, I'll show a few examples of sort of a couple of the tools that we sort of have been working on. Yeah, I mean, again, the other thing for vendors to know is, like, again, if they've been using underscores to break apart all these words, they're going to have to change that. We're going to have to figure out a find and replace or something and switch it to dashes or spaces or something, because the underscores are what will really screw things up if they're using underscores in places where they don't belong. Most of these scripts will simply break. They won't work properly. So, okay, I was just going to show a couple sort of examples of sort of things we've been sort of working on. Oh, somebody put it 255. Let's see, what is the maximum amount of characters for file names to support all? Yeah, 255, I think, is pretty safe for most modern things past, like, what, Windows. I don't even know what version of Windows started to support long file names, but I mean, 255 is pretty safe, which is a pretty long file name, much longer than you're hopefully likely to use. And the Mac is probably even longer than that now, but I think 255 is what most of the fields and certain programs are meant to use, I think. So, so let me just go here to Pro Tools and just show you sort of an example of what we've been working on to sort of make life easier for a user who wants to use this sort of. So let's say I have a file in Pro Tools and I've just created it and it has no name. It's just called record. And one of the things that Kai wrote pretty early on, Kai, you can open up your mic and chat if you want to sort of talk along, but is basically set a keyboard maestro. It's a macro, it's a macro group that basically can build a file name in accordance with our sort of structure. So basically, I basically hit this hotkey to start it, and it basically goes, okay, the naming dialog must be open and selected in Pro Tools. So it's going to warn you that every time. You could disable that after you're used to it. But what it allows me to do here is to type a term. So let's say I have a farm animal, and I start to type the word farm, and it goes, well, here's the categories in the universal category system that match farm. So there's animals farm, ambience farm, and vehicles farm. So, okay, this is an animal farm that I want to define. So I hit return, and it goes, you know, do you want to assign a user category? So in this case, I'll put ext for exterior, right? This is an exterior recording that I want to define. I hit OK, and it basically asks, do I want to define a vendor category? And again, there are different versions of these sets. There's one that doesn't ask for this vendor category, and this one's one I made this morning, which will ask for a vendor category. But this is what I'm going to say, cow. I'm going to define, you know, I have a library of different farm animals, and I'm going to define a subcategory of the types of farm animals. I want to define this as a cow. So this is a third category as a vendor. I'm saying, okay, these are my cow recordings. I enter, and I'm going to say this is close up moves and breaths at fence, right? Something like that. Now when I hit enter, basically it's going to ask, what's the recordist? We probably should change this to become creator ID or something. But if I start to type my name, because I'm storing my name as in this sort of in the macro itself, which I'll show you what it looks like, I basically start to type my name, and I can do that. I can also type, Kai's name should be in there, right? I could type that. If I want, I can type custom. Then now when I hit custom, I could type anything in that I wanted. So I could type something, or Frank, I can do anything I want. I'll put my initials again there. And then the same thing for show. It's going to ask me show. By default, I have it set to just choose none, but I could start to type the little prints, and I say, okay, it shows up there, and it tells me that TLP is the abbreviation I've set for that. And when I hit enter, basically it's going to copy that to the thing into the background. Then it's going to ask me, do any additional information I want to add? This is this user data at the end. So I'm again here, I just have a microphone, MKH416, right? And when I hit enter, basically it's going to build that file name and paste it directly into Pro Tools. So this file name is basically now fully in accordance with our sort of file name structure. And if I bring this over here into Pro Tools, or into SoundMiner, I mean, 1 second, it's got to find it, where I put it. So I drop this here into SoundMiner, and you see there's that. And when I go to expand that out via the script, basically, it basically takes, again, the cat ID, builds the category full. Let me switch over to this view. It took that, it found that -ext right here, and it assigned it to the user category. It found TN and assigned it to Tim Nielsen. It found TLP and matched in the lookup to the little prints. It took this whole middle chunk, again, including the cow, and it basically defined that as the effects name. If I wanted to, again, what I was saying was, if I now went and I said assign the vendor category from the file name, which is just a workflow that I've built to do this, it would basically now go in and also take and find cow dash and assign that here. So this isn't built into the basic script. It sort of forces somebody to go and do it, but again, your point is well taken. I will think about that for sure. So again, in the case of a vendor, we'd probably modify a version of this so that it, could fill in library instead of show, again, if we're using a library name, or I would simply copy this later. If this was a vendor library, this script right now is taking that piece of information and putting it in show, but there's a separate library field. So, you could easily copy it over to there or whatever. So, but again, you can see that by the name of this sort of file name, it's basically filled in all of these things. Again, there are different versions of this. There's also Kai's dad, who's actually wrote this really clever sort of standalone program, which I'm going to open. And it's basically, I think, Kai, correct me if I'm wrong, built on the Chrome developer kit. And
yeah,
so I can
the same engine that powers Slack, actually.
Ah, there you go. So for example, here, I can basically also build a file name here. Now, the really cool thing about this, which isn't working anywhere else, is that I can tell it to search that synonym column. So if I don't know what category something belongs to, I can select the category by starting to type. So I type lion, and it goes, oh, okay, could be a sea lion, or it could be a wildcat. So I click wildcat, and you see the file name is starting to be built here. And I can just tab over to user category. And again, if I wanted to define a user category, I could, or I can just leave it blank. Again, close-up growls, right? My initials, you could just type. This one doesn't have a drop-down list. This is you just type in your initials, but it stores basically from launching it from the previous time, so it would just keep that. Again, show name, maybe I'm just going to type none. And, again, maybe I'm type the name of the microphone in here. And when I hit return, basically that name is now copied to the clipboard. And one of the things that that we have also a set of keyboard Maestro macros that basically from a hotkey. I probably screwed something up. It's working normally that it basically will come back here to Pro Tools and rename that file. I must have the wrong thing set up somehow. But you can also run Apple scripts directly from within this. There's a bit of a lag and things like that. But you can actually paste an Apple script in here to have it run automatically when you hit return. Again, this can also do things just like copying just the cat ID thing. So if you just did this and you wanted to know just what the category ID was, and you typed sailboat, type sail and say, okay, when I click that, basically it's copied just boat sail to the clipboard. So again, you can use this to sort of build file names or things for other things that you want. So this is available. I think it's being ported to PC as well, right, Kai? And
Yeah, the PC port's being built right now. It's also an open source program, so if you go to the GitHub, then you're able to download all the source code, and you can kind of build on top of this if you wanted to.
yeah, but it's a great way for people who don't know the list to come in here and basically, again, searching by a synonym. You know, if I type arcade, it comes up games arcade. You know, oh, there's actually a category of that, and it sort of gives you a little explanation right here and sort of shows you what it is. So it's pretty clever, this sort of thing. Again, and it's and there's this keyboard Maestro thing to enable you to name the Pro Tools right from here. I must have screwed something up, but normally I just hit a hotkey and it switches to Pro Tools, opens this, and renames it right from there. So so there's that. Again, there's some tools, just links, keyboard Maestro scripts that would enable you right from here to assign, also via keyboard Maestro again as well. I can again type, you know, assign all of these to animals, amphibians, and you know, do things like that. So yeah, so that's sort of what we've been working on with that stuff. And let's see, what else was there I wanted to show or talk about? Well, so then I was going to talk really briefly about the vendor requirements again, real quick, which are really quite simple, and then we'll open it up for some questions. And so again, the only requirements for if you want to say you're sort of using this sort of system are that every sound that you basically choose has to be assigned to one of our sort of category subcategories. Again, we've tried to make this list as comprehensive as we can. There shouldn't be many things that can't find a home. And on the Slack channel, there's lots of people who can help if you're sort of like, where would I put this? You know, we can all have discussion. You know, this is a bit of a gray area. People are going to have differing opinions sometimes. But again, we've thought of most things. I truly believe we have. Again, the associated cat ID can't be changed. This is pretty crucial for us that, you know, gun auto is always for machine guns and automatic weapons. You know, somebody doesn't go in and change it to gun MACH, because that would break the whole system. Right now, people who take those sounds, try to run these scripts, nothing's going to work, sort of defeats the purpose. The cat ID has to go at the beginning of the file name, has to be followed by an underscore. These three things are really it for sort of what we're sort of proposing. If nothing else, this will allow a user to know exactly where a sound goes, allow any program to sort of take that information, split it out, etc. And then we're asking that somewhere in the logo, somewhere in the artwork of your library, that you incorporate our little symbol somehow. Again, people are taking that and they're distressing it to make it match their style or changing the color. We don't really care. The idea is just, we're hoping, and this isn't so crucial, but for us, what we'd like is that somebody who's going to potentially buy your library, we could see, or is very clear that you've taken the time to sort of assign these to this system. If they choose to sort of adopt this system for their home library, they know that when they download these sounds from you, they're going to be able to push a button in their program of choice and basically assign these categories and subcategories for them without having to sort of go, oh, is it animal canine? Is it dog? Is it animal dog? Is it dog something? Again, this is this sort of idea. And then again, lastly, this file name thing that we talked about is, you know, while we really encourage it and we hope that people will adopt it and we think that it's a very useful tool, it is completely optional. It's sort of not part of this requirement to sort of say your library is sort of UCS compliant, if you even care and you want to do that. So, so that's sort of where we're at with things. Again, we're trying to keep it simple. Like, we're trying to keep it powerful and flexible at the same time, you know, define these. There's a suggestions channel over on Slack, which basically, you know, we'll slowly start working on version 9 of this list. Our plan is not to release that for quite a while. We don't want to constantly be updating this list and changing it. Our sort of rule is that we won't delete categories once they're defined, because we don't want to force a user, like if we release version 9 of this list, we don't want to force somebody to go back through their whole library or something like that again. One thing I should talk about, and I don't have it ready to show, but it's a pretty clever thing too. A lot of the vendors have sort of thought, you know, what do we do about like going potentially back through old catalog of libraries? Like, one of the things that Justin at SoundMiner has been working on and is completely working, and we're going to do some tests and show this off hopefully soon, is this idea of audio fingerprinting files. And he's got it working to the point where he can take a library, the USC artwork. Yeah, if you just go to the home page, Brett, universalcategorysystem.com, and then click on the resources, it's in the, and I'll show you, it's basically right here under logos. And we have it in basically EPS, PNG, and SVG, so you can take these things in whatever format you need. So they're right here on the Google Drive that everybody can download. But this idea is a user already has a library. They basically, SoundMiner, and in theory, any program can take this audio file and fingerprint it, generate a completely unique sort of checksum of that file. A vendor could basically resupply metadata only to the SoundMiner server, for example, and a user could basically say, download new metadata for all these files. And it's working. We did some tests with some of Kai's files. Even if the users converted the file to FLAC, it still works. The rolling hash can sort of define a fingerprint for that file and sort of match it backwards. So we don't know exactly how this will work yet, but what it will hopefully entail or allow is that a vendor could basically simply modify some metadata, upload that, and allow users who have purchased all their libraries to basically update the names in accordance with this system without having to resupply the files. So it's pretty cool, and it works pretty well. It also would allow, in theory, the crowdsourcing of some of this work, because somebody will inevitably take Frank's libraries and probably make them work with this new system. And what we're sort of thinking is we could take that metadata, send it back to Frank, let him approve it. He would be the one to submit it if he's interested in this. Somebody else would probably be willing to do a lot of this work. And again, because we're talking about rebuilding potential file names, we don't know exactly how that would work. You would send the new file name stored in a temporary location, and then the user could choose to actually rename the files if they wanted to. Things like that have to be worked out. But it's a cool technology, and it's a pretty interesting idea that sort of would allow us to or allow you to update metadata without having to resupply sound files to everybody. They wouldn't have to re-download the files. So that's a work in progress. Yeah, and again, once somebody took the work of doing somebody's library once, again, the whole point of this is that what we're trying to avoid is that every time somebody buys a sound effect, that they have to sit there and spend a ton of time changing the metadata for their personal library to have a sort of organized library. Our hope is that some of the big heavy hitters will adopt this. Like I said, Boom and Soundmorph are already sort of on board. Pro Sound Effects, I believe, will probably be. And we hopefully will pressure some of the smaller vendors whose work isn't so tidy and whose metadata is sort of messy and the file names are sort of messy. So hopefully they'll feel a little pressure to sort of try to sort of provide better file names and better metadata and things like that. If nothing else that comes out of this is this sort of idea that people should understand that, the file name itself is an important piece of what they're sending out, then, that's what we're hoping to achieve. So I think that that's sort of where we're at with things again. And so now anybody who wants to can just, I've allowed you can just unmute yourself now if you want to sort of ask a question or make a comment, but this is where we're at. We'd love feedback. Again, the list itself is now locked off. We're not going to make any changes to it. It's become sort of, we spent a couple months sort of defining this list. We know it's never going to satisfy every single person. There's going to be some things that they wish it had or different things. Again, part of this is compromise. That this idea is that, we do believe we've given you basically a place for almost anything you should be able to think of. And the hope is that, again, if we all sort of agree on these category IDs, then we've just made the interchange of sort of sound effects around the world so much less painful. Frank has got us.
Hey,
yeah. Hey, man.
This is fantastic, Tim. Man,
Thanks, man.
Really, really good stuff. I'm kind of curious if you made sure you didn't eat at the Applebee's when you recorded that sound.
I have not eaten at Applebee's in many, many years. Don't worry.
Yeah, you should not. You should not eat there.
No.
So, are there any other ways for like I have over 90 libraries,
right?
And the audio fingerprint, is that the only way? Is that the easiest way? Like, are there text scripts? Because my file names, except for when I'm I reverse characters, are pretty consistent.
Yeah.
So like I always had some sort of category at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any way that maybe I don't know, maybe you can help me on the side, is if I could do it myself instead of doing audio fingerprinting?
Sure.
Like, and then send somebody a list, like an Excel sheet or a text thing, and then they can just, boom, if they want to record this product, rename the files.
Yeah, I mean, there are different ways to do that. I mean, you could, in theory, supply like a CSV
Okay.
Excel type file. The only thing that would be, I don't know as far as like, could it match the fingerprint that way? I don't know how that would work. This is, something that's still being explored. If they had the file name exactly as you had it when you delivered it, then you
Right.
could simply resupply the file name in a CSV column, and SoundMiner or different programs could say match that column and pull in this metadata assigned to these fields, things like that. And then you basically probably um, figure out a way to rebuild the file name. And again, these things are all being thought through. I don't think we have complete solutions for these things yet. I think clever people will come up with interesting ideas for this. The other thing that you could do in something like SoundMiner and other programs, you could build a workflow basically that takes your file name and sort of rebuilds it to this structure. And you could actually supply the workflow to people who are using that or different programs. But again, I know that this is a big issue, is sort of like, how do we go backwards with all these things? And I don't think we have all those solutions yet, but certainly people are thinking about it. And I think over on the Slack channel, you could say, like, here's some examples of my file names, and people will sort of help figure out, what could we do to sort of do that. I mean, certainly on your end, we could automate the renaming of your files fairly easily, right? So if your names are fairly consistent, there would be ways to sort of do this. The only thing you might have to do is, for whatever category you had defined internally, you would have to assign it via one of these tools to basically a new set of things. Right. And Kai's written something very simple, for example, on a Finder, which you can highlight a set of files. I don't have it running right now, but you can simply highlight a bunch of files, let's say all your gun machines or whatever, select them, launch this little keyboard maestro, assign it to the category gun auto, and it'll just simply paste gun auto _ at the beginning of that file name. Done. In theory, you're done right there. Now all your sound files sort of match. Even if you change nothing else in your file name, that would be an easy way to sort of accomplish this. But certainly there are lots of tools for resculpting file names and using regex to sort of break pieces apart and reorder them and things like this. So that part of it will be pretty easy. Then the question is, how do you redeliver that metadata? And there'll be different solutions to that, I think. I don't know that we know them all right now. This audio fingerprinting is one idea. So you would finish it, you would right click in SoundMiner, say upload metadata basically, or something. Somebody had your file, would basically go to and say, ping for new metadata, and if it came through. And again, we don't have every step of this sort of worked out. We know that it works in theory and stuff, but again, it is a SoundMiner specific thing. There'll be other ways I hope to do this too that wouldn't require that and things like that, because obviously not everybody's a SoundMiner user, and we're not. I know we talk a lot about SoundMiner, but this is not a SoundMiner specific thing. We'd love other programs to basically figure out ways to do that too.
Are all these new fields that Justin has put in, are these encrypted or are they open?
They're open. So basically,
Good.
They're now being written into, and I believe I can talk about this. I did ask him if there was anything proprietary, and it's not. Reaper was the first one that started this idea, and what they realized was there's a set of fields of metadata called IXML fields, right? And within the IXML fields, and again, I'm not a programmer, this is over my head a little bit, but they basically are user definable categories. You can simply define any category that you want. So now what Justin is doing when he writes metadata right now is that every category in SoundMiner is also being written into the user IXML fields as a user category. So user category equals user subcategory. So in theory, any program can pull these back out. Nuno could pull them out. Soundly could pull them out. Pro Tools, if they ever got their head out of their butt, could pull them out. But Reaper is going to be able to utilize these. You'll be able to put these in right from Reaper as well. Or if you load up one of your sounds in Reaper, all these fields would be available even within Reaper and things like that, as I understand how they're working on these things. So yeah, so this is the hope with metadata, is that, again, I know that like right now Basehead is writing subcategory into, I believe, sort of an obscure B-Wave field called I don't even know what it is. So, but it's not a field defined as subcategory, because at B-Wave there is no official, but in the IXML fields you can define exactly the words, so. And again, if nothing else, if another program didn't want to define subcategory by that term, called it something else, at the very least, you could pull that information out of the subcategory XML field and put it in your program using whatever you want, right? So it should enable the metadata to be available to other people and other programs, which I think will be great. Again, you could basically send out one set of metadata for all of your files, and any user in Soundly, Basehead, SoundMiner should be able to pull in these associated fields in theory, without you having to sort of worry about sending both. And again, my argument would be that within the file name itself should be enough information that Soundly or Basehead or any of these other programs could also take that file name and just break these pieces out right out of the file name. They could use the category thing and fill in category, subcategory.
Yeah, I love that. I love that concept. Yeah, I love the file name thing. That's one of the things you did about this is the file naming thing.
Yeah, I mean, again, I feel strongly about the file name, but I also realize that some people, I don't want to we're trying not to make this so rigid that we push people away from it, and we say, okay, at the very least, if you send out a cat ID, then we have that information. And that's a very useful piece of information for people to have again. So if nothing else, it's a very simple modification to just tag that to the beginning of the file names. And, most libraries are going to probably fill into one or two categories. I mean, most of your libraries, Frank, are so isolated that, the Thunder library is going to have a category. It's not like it's going to need you one by one going through the files. You'd be able to bulk select them all and be like, Nature Thunder, whatever. So, this won't be particularly hard for most libraries, I think, to basically sort of do this.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah. Arno's saying recorders use IXML as well. Yeah, so the IXML fields were basically built, I think, for recorder, things for storing dialogue, take numbers, and things like that. And but it turns out that there's like enough room to store all these other things in there as well. So, yeah. Anybody else have any thoughts or questions for us or anything? Again, this is an ongoing thing. I encourage you all to kind of come hang out on the Slack channel and ask questions or things like that.
Yeah, I have a question, Tim.
Yeah, go ahead, Sasha.
So the tools you've shown for getting this file name structure seem to be build the file name and then the program can extract out this information. Is it only that direction, or would I be able to, in SoundMiner, build all the fields, all the metadata, and then say, hey, now rename?
Absolutely. So I should point out, the way I work in my library is to build file names with all these pieces of information, and then I let, in my case, SoundMiner parse all of these out. You could absolutely come over here, and a lot of people work this way. I think Kai works this way for sure. Is you could simply, again, you could come in here and basically, I could say, I could go to category full, and I could say, oh, all of these are ambience birdsong. I could come here to the user category, and I could type for all of these and modify these, right? I could come to the designer and type my name for all of these. And then in SoundMiner, you would do it basically via this thing called a workflow. And you would basically take all these blocks and you would assign them together, and you would build basically a new file name, and then you would rename the file with that. So, you could basically copy certain fields to other fields, or you could basically build a file name and things like that. And so you do this thing called field build probably. So you'd literally say, like, I want my file name to be, and again, a lot of people work this way, and yes, you absolutely can. So, I could say that I want my file name to be category followed by, a dash, or in this case, you'd say basically cat ID, right? So cat ID is the first part of my file name. Then I'm going to put here effects name, and then then basically I would put here designer, because that's what SoundMiner calls this field, and then something like show, right, which is what we're calling this. So something like that, and you define the length of it. Basically, you can do things like that in SoundMiner. I'm sure other programs have the ability to do things like this too. But yes, a lot of people, you could just drop all your sound files with nothing. You could say record 1, record 2, record 3. If that's what you wanted to do, you could come in here and then again assign them to a certain category ID. Then you can bulk fill these pieces of information. There's lots of ways to do this. So Arno, thanks, man. Arno was very helpful in all this too. He's got to go, but he was very helpful in defining all these categories with us. So yeah, totally, you can absolutely do that.
Awesome.
Sorry to interrupt. This is like a thing that's some of the newer versions of SoundMiner can import workflows. We can make a preset for people who want to do that.
That's right. Yeah, we could easily just put up a workflow we would put it over here on the under utilities. If I go to Mac, SoundMiner, we already have sort of this workflows folder, and this is where because you can import those workflows. Again, some of the things people are working on will upload things here, and so yeah, we can easily. If somebody builds one of these things once, they can do that. Other thing is like these scripts. The ability to write Lewis scripts is, anybody can write them to do different things. And there are other ones that exist for, like, I have one that removes all the metadata from a file, just clears all the show and international fields just for my own use and things. But again, people can write their own scripts that can do things for different programs and put it here. And again, as other programs sort of, as people develop tools specific to certain types of programs, they can easily upload those into this sort of sort of structure as well. Right now, they'll have to just contact either Kai or myself, basically, if they want something put up there. We don't have anything we're not just going to allow anybody to just post things all over these. We want to have sort of some kind of control over it, just so that it doesn't become sort of a mess. But yeah, again, I think, Stosh, the whole point is that, now that this sort of list is defined, there's going to be a lot of clever ways to use it, and we're excited to see what people come up with and how to, use this to sculpt information and sort of do these things. There's so many clever things you can do in scripting and using regex and different things for redefining file names and stuff that again, we're hoping that this can be relatively painless to sort of implement. I know, Christian, you and I can talk later if you'd like. I mean, if you're interested in this and different things that could be done with it. But again, we would love, obviously, to get everybody on board with this, so that, again, in some fashion, it doesn't have to be even complex, but in some fashion. I know Nuno talking about putting it into sound particles and ways for, naming files and things like that, potentially, and things. And again, the really nice thing about this, I will say, is that when you have a defined category system like this, you learn it over time, and you know what the cat ID is. And so you know that at a glance at a file, and again, the category IDs that we've come up with should be pretty much readable. The goal of these things was to, even if you just had this, you should be able to read what that is, and you can, alarm siren is pretty clear, alarm electronic, alarm clock, alarm buzzer, even this little short ID is meant to be user readable, right? It's not meant to be confusing. So with that little tiny piece of information, again, we know that, all farm animals go there. It's things like that. So that's really what we're up to. And yeah. Anybody else have any questions or comments?
I have a comment about the translations team.
Yeah, Alan. Nice to meet you finally.
Thank you. We have, I think the synonyms and the explanation columns should be translated too, because they have a huge potential. We have tens of thousands of editors here in Brazil.
Sure.
And, they maybe don't speak English, and they can be integrated in this kind of system very easily.
Sure. Yeah, I will say that we didn't want to sort of overwhelm the people helping us with translations and sort of say, oh, by the way, you also have to translate this entire list of things. I think our hope is that we figure out sort of a way to crowdsource this also, to sort of allow people to come in and basically add these things themselves. Maybe we split this out, just have, and maybe I make that editable and everybody can come in here, and then eventually we can copy and paste them back. Because I don't, these things, again, some of these words in here are probably very Americanized words, unfortunately, and things that wouldn't necessarily even translate somewhere else. Like animal species, sure, that's easy. But when you get to some of these, some of these types of things, maybe, there's no actually word for that. Like, so that's why we're sort of thinking that, this is the synonym thing is an ongoing thing for sure. Again, what we can do with it, we're interested to see. I think that, so one of the other ideas is that in a program, we'd love to have it so that in a program you could do a keyword search, and it would also search the synonym field, right? So that's not fully implemented anywhere quite yet, but, this idea, again, if you type dragon, it would come up creatures dragon. If you typed Godzilla, it would go, oh, creatures monster, or something like that. We're just sort of, and so this will keep growing for sure. We sort of have spent some time on it, but this was one of the later things to sort of come into existence. And so, this can keep growing over time, and we'll figure out how to sort of utilize that to our advantage. But I agree. I think that would be, again, for something like this program, again, for searching, you could basically, and this program has the ability to load in a separate list. So you could actually load in the foreign language version of this, right, fairly easily, right? I think, Kai, wouldn't be hard to do.
Yeah, it's that little pink button next to the in the select category next to the X. You'll be able to import your own XLSX files, and you could have a translated version. They'll look through the list with the
right. So you could search for synonyms in a foreign language, and yeah, and then you'd still get this sort of. You could have it. I guess it would come up with the foreign language of this, but still the cat ID is not translated. The cat ID sort of stays the same in any language. But yeah, so exactly. So yeah, I think the foreign language stuff again is something that we're hoping to sort of figure out how is it going to be useful to people. How can it sort of grow over time and stuff. But what we really just wanted to get started with was, again, at the very least, get category subcategory. defined right now and not sort of bog the people. You know, it would be really overwhelming to go also translate this entire explanations. Of course, we hope that will happen. We don't expect one person to probably be able to do that very easily. So again, our thinking is maybe there's a way that you could compile 10 people that you trust in Brazil and say, hey, let's tackle this. We break it apart into sections. You do, you know, A, B, C categories. I do D, E, F or something. And then you supply back to us that sort of translated thing. We can store it somewhere. Maybe we store a set of localized translations that have all of the synonyms and explanations. And again, a user could then compile that and use it as they want. I mean, again, what we're really supplying here is information to a large degree. And this information is sort of freely available to anybody to use how they want, to implement how they want. So, you know, I don't think we would send, you know, by default, the version of the list on the top level doesn't include these translations. We're keeping them out until they're a little bit more complete. But also, you know, we want the sort of top level of this to be fairly simple and just sort of show these columns. But again, we'll make available all these translated columns for anybody who wants to implement them in different ways. Again, this is basically, this is just so you know, this is the list that the category list in SoundMiner is built off. So this is a copy of it, but this includes the translations. And again, this is something that I'll make a downloadable version of this once we get at least these languages filled in and when they're complete. I don't want to send it out when this stuff is still missing a bunch of information. We're getting them done and people are working on them now. And again, anybody who wants to do a language that's not here is welcome to sort of create one themselves. And just let us know, and we'll, you know, what basically how the languages work, just so everybody knows, is it follows the localization sort of settings of your computer. So for example, in SoundMiner, if you're in Brazil and you go to create these new categories in SoundMiner, it basically sees that you're in Brazil and it creates Portuguese Brazil basically and it will create the category underscore PT-BR. It'll create the subcategory and the category full, and it will create those fields. So in America, these fields don't show up by default. So if I go to, again, like this view here, see these categories here, basically they show up here because I went through, switched my computer into all of these languages, came and added these fields back in. But by default, these don't show up to me sort of in America. But so by switching my language into French, then I can get this field to sort of show up for me. And then I switched it to other languages. And so just so I could demonstrate what these things are doing. But these are the international, basically, localization codes for different countries and languages. So DA is Danish, you know, Finnish, French. So that's how that's how this is being utilized right now. So the column headings basically match this sort of localization that I believe Windows and Mac and stuff all use these agreed upon sort of localization things. So I don't know in the Windows version of it if this is working. I don't know. This might only be a SoundMiner V5 Pro thing. I'm not sure exactly, but this is how it works here in any way. Yeah. Well, hey, an hour and a half. That wasn't too terrible. Again, you know, we hope that people will yeah, Nuno, go ahead. Just you can unmute yourself.
Hi, can you talk a little more about this cat chart column that you have?
Yeah, sure. So I should point out, this is mentioned in the documentation. The cat short isn't really used anywhere right now for us. So it's basically, this is not a metadata field that exists to my knowledge anywhere. But some people, there's like categories in different programs like short ID or something like that some people want to use. This is just the abbreviated version of just the category part, the first part. And it's just a column of information that we thought might be useful for somebody to use in a way that we haven't thought of. Again, when you name a file name, you have to use this sort of the full category ID, not just, you can't just put this at the beginning of the file name. This isn't sort of enough. But
only for viewing purposes.
Yeah, it's really just for viewing. If somebody wanted to put this information in a column in the program of their choosing, because somebody might not want to see all of these things, and they might want to just be able to say, you know, I just want to see that all the ceramic things are sort of sorted together. And you know, it would be the equivalent of basically saying, show me everything in the ceramics column. And then it's just purely an optional piece of text that we thought might be useful for people to sort of use in viewing sort of things. So that's all. That's what it's meant for. I just thought while I was building this list, I might as well include that as well for somebody who wanted. Then I don't have to sit here and try and go. It would be a pain in the ass to sit here and go through and, you know, try to strip it out of this because all these different length of characters and stuff. So that's all. Yeah.
Tim.
Yeah.
Are the vendors category and user category already available for the end user in SoundMiner or
Yeah, in the latest builds, I believe they are now. And what you do is you basically go to the librarian menu and you say add category full fields, and that will actually now add also user category and vendor category, which are now in this latest build. Now, this is a beta build. This is version 5.5.1. I think that's the version that they're currently available. Anything past that, but I don't. This might have only been sent to me. I don't know if Justin has posted this one yet, but they will be if not soon. So basically, if you go to library and add category full fields, it adds cat ID, category full, user category, vendor category, which are sort of new definitions that we're sort of using.
okay,
in this
maybe
system.
user category and vendor category is available just for you. Yeah.
Maybe so, maybe,
Yeah,
but that will be coming soon. And again, this field here, category full, didn't used to exist. I asked Justin to put it in. It's basically just a hyphenated version of the category subcategory, but this is how I view in my library. I don't want to see separate. I just want to see one sort of combined category. So I like to sort of view it that way. And so, again, we'd love to encourage these sort of category full, user category, vendor category, cat ID to be fields that are sort of adopted also by other programs, because we think, again, keeping them sort of with a uniform name would be quite useful. So, this is what I usually view in my normal view, which looks something like this. Well, I guess right now I'm using category, subcategory, but yeah. So again, the definitions that we've sort of put into the file name sort of are what we're calling these sort of things. But again, different programs will assign them to different things. Some of them might call what we're calling creator ID in the file name could go to designer, recordist, vendor. It could be called anything, right? So that's fine. And what we're calling sort of source ID right now is mapped to show in SoundMiner, but somebody could simply modify a script to remap that to library instead, or project, or whatever terminology might exist in a certain program. You could remap this sort of this part of the file name to there fairly easily. We've come up with these names to call it in the description of the effects name, just to try to make it sort of clear what we were talking about. But what each program sort of does with that block of information is, of course, entirely up to them and how they want to map it to their sort of workflows and their sort of things like that. So yeah, but yeah, I 5.5.1 and later should have this in. If 5.5.1 isn't up yet on his beta sort of thing, it will be soon, I'm pretty sure, whatever the next build is.
Yeah, nice.
And again, I apologize for constantly talking about SoundMiner, Christian, and things where this is not meant to be a SoundMiner specific thing. We'd love to have everybody on board, but this is just because I've been using SoundMiner and Justin has sort of had a head start on some of this, being involved in it. That's just what I can show you right now. I would love
no worries.
Okay.
No worries at all.
Okay. That,
I'm a SoundMiner user as well, so we all
Great.
love SoundMiner.
Right. Okay. Well, again, we would, I think from a user standpoint, to have this implemented in as many programs as we can is the goal, to have at least in some form, even if it's just the cat ID and category subcategory. Again, that would be a huge benefit to users, not to have to constantly go through every library they buy and sort of go, where does this go? What should this fit? And things like that. So yeah, can I talk about, yeah. So let's see, look at the chat and see if I missed anything else, but yeah, well, that's where we're at with things. And anybody else have anything else to add? I know, for example, Andy's here. I know, I just want to point out that, one of the things that, as we looked over this list, Andy was really crucial helping define this list too. And, Andy's an avid nature recordist and a bird enthusiast and things. And, we realized, the system we came up with to categorize birds is a huge compromise to what, a true ornithologist would want or something to categorize things. We have sort of ideas about, expanding this with sort of some optional sort of things. Again, this idea of this user category, this could be that Andy might want to define a whole set of birds by, proper name and stuff that, fit into the category system, but have a much broader sort of list. Somebody who's doing guns might want to organize a list of common gun names and abbreviations or something that a vendor could then, if they wanted to. So there's sort of this usable sort of expandability to this list to some degree, with this sort of stuff. And again, we talked about creature source, for example. We defined creatures as by the sort of type that they are and things, but a lot of discussion about something like a library of creature source material, how do you what are you going to do with that? So, in our case, we have this category called creature source. And so, this would be the cat ID, but then you would add within the vendor, it might be growl, snarl, hiss, or whatever, or it might be the animal that it was recorded, or different things. So we realized that, just the subcategory may not be enough for a lot of people who want to sort of interact with this. And so that's the idea of this vendor category and the user category, is it allows these sort of optional extensions, which also still don't break anything. If there is no dash to define a user category, then the scripts should be written in such a way that they, just keep basically, that just work as it was, so, yeah. And, I will think about that, the changing of the dash to something like a double dash or something like that, because that's a valid point. And it's not quite too late to change that, probably. Just have to modify a couple scripts and things that we're doing, but yeah. Yeah. So
are you mostly going to be, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Be going over the same stuff on your next Zoom meeting, just because a couple of my colleagues and our assistant should be privy to a couple of these things, so I should have them watch it.
Yeah, I'm also recording this, and so if it's okay with everybody, I'll make this available to other vendors to watch. I mean, quite a few people weren't able to make it today, and so my thinking was to make this available for other vendors to watch and stuff. I mean, again, eventually I will make a proper sort of set of videos that will go on the YouTube channel and stuff, but at least for now, we'll make this video available. And yes, probably the next one I do will be this exact same thing, but just aimed for a wider audience and stuff. But we really wanted to show it off to sort of, vendors in particular, people who are, because again, this is going to, this will, if you want to adopt this, if you want to be included, of course, we're asking, for certain things, and we know that it might be a burden and we don't want it to be, but things like that. So yeah, I just wanted to show it off to a few, people who are interested, and kind of helps me also think about, how to present it as well the next time and stuff. And again, I put this keynote thing together just this morning. I'll keep modifying that, and but just to have some sort of way to walk it through. So I do think the file name is something that is something that has to be explained well for people to understand, or I don't want it to be confusing and things. And so yeah, what we'll do is we'll have separate videos for like an introduction. There'll be a whole video just on the file name, just on the different helper apps. There'll be just videos for certain specific programs. So there'll be some just for how do you implement this in SoundMiner only, so that just users of SoundMiner can go there. How you implement this in SoundLeader, Basehead, or Sound Particles. We could build little tutorial videos of things like that. If it gets implemented and people choose to use it, then we'll make sure that it's clear to people how it can be used in those things. So yeah, I expect as we have time, we'll just keep making lots of videos and things. But yeah, the next weekend, I'll probably just plan to do it same time next Saturday, and I'll probably send out an invitation tomorrow to the whole big group and spread it out wide and just let in as many people come and want to see it as possible, because I think we're now ready to sort of do like what we did today and show it off. So yeah, but I'll make this recording available, and just ping me afterwards, and I can send you a link if you want to show it to somebody before then.
Tim, Kai, thank you so much, and everybody else that's put in all that work on this. This is amazing.
Yeah, Alan, or Rick, were you able to sort of see it enough? Or if not, I'll send you the link, and you can see the non-cut-off screen.
Actually, and I stumbled on it and got some information in the chat. It was just under view options. I had it zoomed in too far.
Yeah, I see. Good. Okay.
I'm supposed to know technology, and I just
No problem. No problem.
Thank you very much, Tim.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming. And again, come join us on Slack. Ask any questions. And again, if I'm a little busy working on a show too, but anybody wants to sort of talk more in depth, I hope, Christian, you and I can have a chat at some point, maybe if you have interest in things, we can talk more and stuff like that too. Because implementing it into a program is obviously a little more complicated.
I would love that, Tim, and I just hope we can do that another day, because my family.
Oh yeah, not today. Yeah, no, not. I know it's late there. No, not now. You just send me a message anytime you want to. Usually early morning, my time is always available, at least for the next week. After that, I start a mix, or I'm mixing.
Okay.
But all of next week in the morning, I could easily hop on a call. So it'd be like early evening your time, probably.
That's great. That's
okay.
Great.
Yeah, just send me a message. And
the whole project is amazing that you've.
Thank you. Well, it wasn't, again, a lot of really amazing people have helped out on it, and it wouldn't have been possible without them. And so we're excited to see what can happen with it now. I think, we have some good momentum, and I hope we can make it stick. So.
Absolutely. Me too.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you so much.
All right, everybody. Well, if there's no, I'll stay around for a few minutes if anybody else wants to ask anything else. Otherwise, I know people have to drop off. So thanks again for coming, and we'll talk to you all soon, I hope.